True Life Narrative, The Night of Broken Glass, by Ina R. Friedman. Young Manny Gale had already been bullied and humiliated by his classmates in Germany. Now he and his family faced a night of terror. Editor's note: during the week of February 6th through 13th, ABC TV will present The Winds of War, based on two novels by Herman Wouk. This production covers the complete period of World War II, the great conflict against Japan and Germany. Many separate stories have been woven together in the production. One of them concerns the fate of an elderly Jewish scholar and his niece, who fall into German hands. Because Nazi policies regarding Jews are one of the big themes of The Winds of War, Reed presents a tie-in feature about Manny Gale, the son of a wealthy merchant in Hitler's Germany. The horror of Nazism came home to Manny in November 1938 on Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. In a program planned by Hitler's government, Nazi stormtroopers all over Germany attacked Jewish people and urged the population to do likewise. Nearly 200 synagogues were burned or otherwise destroyed. Businesses and homes were broken into and their contents smashed. Jewish men, especially wealthy ones, were sent to concentration camps without trials. Some Jews were murdered while police, under orders not to interfere, stood by. This, then, is the story of one family who lived through the horrors of Kristallnacht. To get a broader picture of what happened to Jews under Hitler, watch The Winds of War on TV. I walked into the dining room of the Pentagon in 1959 to attend an important meeting with Army officials. World War II had ended 14 years earlier, and now Germany was being permitted to rearm. The Army Chief of Staff came over and slapped me on the back. "Congratulations, Manny! You've been selected to help us set up the German Army." Go back to Germany? He must be crazy. Let them get another military expert. I never wanted to see Germany again. My family had been among the lucky ones to get out of Germany in 1938, after Kristallnacht. My father and I were returning from a trip to Breslau. We had gone to visit my brothers at the Jewish boarding school there. I was shy and insecure at age 14. And had chosen to put up with anti-Semitic taunts and beatings by my classmates in our local school. Even though Jews had been expelled from public schools, my parents had obtained permission for me to remain. As we approached our town of Trebnitz, my father and I stopped to look at the sunset. Instead, we saw smoke spiraling across the old fortress town and its ancient walls. "My God!" Father cried. "Our house is on fire!" He drove down the hill to the entrance of the town. There was a barricade in front of the gate, and the mayor and chief of police, both in Nazi uniforms, stood on either side of the roadblock. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded. "Remove that barricade! My house is on fire!" "Not your house. Not yet. It's your synagogue," hurt Gale. "Get out! We are confiscating your car." My father didn't move. "Get out here, Gale! By order of the chief of police, right now!" What was happening? Where were my mother and grandmother and grandfather? "We wish you luck," the mayor shouted as he started our car. "If you live through the night, Heil Hitler!" If we lived through the night, Dad? What does he mean? For the first time since I was a small boy, my father took my hand. I wanted to run, but couldn't. A terrible fear grew in me. I forced one foot to go in front of the other. I'd begged my parents to leave Germany the year before, after I had been humiliated for the 100th time. Someone had slipped a watch into my pocket and then accused me of stealing. "At least send me to Palestine, to work with the youth groups there," I had pleaded. My father had lectured me about keeping our family together. Now the street was silent. Usually there were ambulances racing past the hospital and people coming from Mass at St. Hedwig's Church. My father's hand held mine tighter. A sheet with a crude drawing of a Jew, his head cut off, covered the window of Goldstein's barber shop. Father stumbled on some broken glass. I saw a sign above the shoemaker's door, "Let the Jew croak." We turned the corner. Noise exploded in our ears as a revolving spotlight on the back of a truck flashed from one end of the street to the other. Stormtroopers stood on the truck shouting directions to the townspeople through a bullhorn. "Destroy everything Jewish! Let nothing remain!" The spotlight swung to our store. A stuffed likeness of Father with a noose around his neck hung from a second-story window. The crowd threw itself against the windows. My father and I tried to push our way through the crowd, but 4 SS troopers grabbed him by the arms. They knocked him to his knees and made him crawl toward the synagogue. I slipped into a drugstore. "A tube of toothpaste," I mumbled, wondering if I could sneak out the back. "Get out," the owner said. "You can't hide here." I opened the door of the pharmacy. My classmates were waiting for me outside. My partner in chemistry lab, Gunter, seized my right arm and forced the toothpaste from my hand. 2 boys held me while he smeared it on my face. Someone else ripped my trouser leg with a broken beer bottle. I kicked and thrashed as my neighbor Ulrich ripped off my shirt. "To the fire! To the fire!" commanded the bullhorn on the truck. The truck's spotlight caught the burning synagogue in its glare. The mob ran toward the blaze. I raced home. "Mother, grandmother, where are you?" "Upstairs. We're on the 2nd floor. Manny, run away. They took grandfather, and they'll take you. Hide." My mother trembled as she and my grandmother huddled on the upstairs landing, behind 2 upholstered chairs. The spotlight focused on our house. A huge log shattered the oak doors. Hundreds of people surged inside, yelling, screaming, laughing, knocking over the furniture, pulling up the rugs and stripping the closets. I stood there, shocked, raging, helpless. "Look out the windows, Jews!" the bullhorn blared. "Look at your synagogue burning! Citizens, return to the square!" Obediently, the mob turned away. From our window, we could see my father and grandfather and 8 other Jewish men. They had been chained together and forced to dance around the synagogue. The town band struck up a Strauss waltz as the stained glass windows crashed to the ground. I could not stand it any longer. I ran downstairs and through the crowds to shield my grandfather. "Swine!" a stormtrooper shouted. He chained me between father and grandfather. The heat of the burning synagogue seared my face. "Stop!" the voice over the bullhorn directed. "Unchain the Jews! The fire is spreading!" The stormtroopers removed the chains and handcuffed the men in groups of 2s and 3s. I was overlooked. When a burning beam fell across the square, the crowd retreated. In the confusion, I ran home. Grandmother and mother were still cowering behind the chairs. The captions, "Broken windows in Jewish stores, houses, and synagogues all over Germany" gave Kristallnacht its name. Through the open window, I could hear the bullhorn redirecting the mob to our house. "The synagogue is finished! Back to the Gale House!" "Come on, we've got to get out of here," I said. But before we could leave, the crowd came, armed with rifles, sticks, pipes, crowbars. With unbelievable fury, they tore the tiles off the ovens, overturned the china closets, and ripped the ivories off the piano keys. "It's our quarters, not the Jews'," the maids told the stormtrooper. "Don't you touch it." The stormtrooper lifted his bullhorn. "Leave the maids alone," he told the mob. "But there are Jews upstairs in the house. Germans, do your duty." 100 twisted faces rushed up the stairs and swirled into one monstrous beast. I fought to stay conscious, but collapsed. When I woke up, a stormtrooper was standing over me. "Get out of the house, Jews, and don't come back. And if I find a gun in this house, you'll all be shot before the day is out." He walked out of the house. I led my mother and grandmother out into the street. For the first time in my 14 years, I was in charge. A woman whose son and husband had been seized by the Nazis sheltered us that night in her apartment. She was half crazed with grief. At 6 a.m, stormtroopers burst in. "All of you out! No Jews allowed in this building!" I could only lead mother and grandmother home. There was nowhere else to go. On the way, a stooped, white-haired tramp bumped into me. His face was deformed by purple bruises. He could barely focus his sunken eyes. "Excuse me," I muttered, and steered the women from his path. Non-Jewish shopkeepers, sweeping the glass from the pavement, looked the other way as we passed. The stinging odor of last night's fire clung to the walls of the town despite the crisp November air. Our house was in a shambles, except for the maids' rooms. Grandmother collapsed on one of the beds. There was a knock at the door. A neighbor stood there supporting the white-haired tramp we had bumped into earlier. "This is your grandfather. He has been wandering up and down our street, unable to recognize the house he has lived in for 40 years. I sank to the floor, remembering the words of our cousins in America. My parents had written them, describing the situation in Germany and asking if my brother and I could visit them. They had replied, "You must be exaggerating your situation. No civilized nation could possibly permit such an intolerance. Things will straighten out." There was a tap at the window. I looked up at the broad face of Johann, a farmer who had been in the army with my father in World War I. He knocked aside the shards of glass and passed eggs, butter, cheese, bread, and winter apples through the window. A few days later, when grandfather had recovered, we went to the bank. Grandfather was one of the directors. The clerk, who had always fawned over him, was curt. "Your funds now belong to the Third Reich. You Jews must pay for the damages you caused on Kristallnacht." For 6 weeks we worried about father. Then a letter arrived from Buchenwald, the camp where my father had been imprisoned. "Please send me the certificate awarding me the Iron Cross. The authorities are releasing those who won medals in World War I. In March, we received another notice. Herr Gale will be released, providing he leaves the country within 6 weeks. If he is still in Germany after that time, he will be arrested and returned to Buchenwald. 6 weeks? My grandfather went to a contact who knew how to get things done, for a price. Bankrupt me, grandfather said, but get me 7 visas. No, 5 visas. My wife and I are too old. Our fate is in Germany. Every day I went to the station to look for father. One day, 3 cripples, supporting one another, hobbled slowly down the steps of the train. I didn't recognize their battered faces. "Manny, Manny, it's Dad," one of them called. He limped towards me, filthy and unshaven, his elbow protruding from his skin. "How'd you break your arm and nose?" I whispered. "On the way to Buchenwald, they made us jump off a 70-foot cliff onto the dead bodies of those who couldn't get out of the way. Enough. Of some things, we shouldn't talk." The next day we left for Hamburg and boarded a ship. We sat in our small cabin, not quite believing our good fortune as our ship, jammed to double capacity, steamed free of Germany. 2 days out of Portugal, the captain called father to his cabin and handed him a telegram. Father's hand trembled as he read it. "It has come to light that Herr Gale participated in underground activities against the Third Reich. You are to turn the ship around and return the entire family to Hamburg." "I don't know what this is all about," said father, his face ashen. "I served my country in World War I and was wounded in battle. I still have the scars and a hole at the bottom of my spine." The captain took out his cigarette lighter. "I have the authority to arrest you, but if I did not receive the message, I cannot act." The paper burned. When we entered the harbor in Havana, Cuba, a boat pulled alongside our ship. A rotund gentleman in a khaki uniform climbed aboard. All the passengers lined up to present their visas. We were first. Father opened his briefcase and pulled out the papers. "These are no good," the official said. "The entrance price has been raised. You must provide an additional $300 per person." Father stared at the man. $1,500? But we were only permitted to take $50. "Then you'll have to return to Germany." He nodded to the captain. "Take them back." Mother screamed. "Look at his arm! Look at his broken nose! We'll be killed!" "Shh," my father said. He turned to the customs officer. "I have relatives in America. They will send money. You will have to wait in jail." Through barred prison windows on Trisel Cunha, an island in the harbor, we watched the tiny threads of foam break against the shore. "Cheer up," father said. "This isn't Buchenwald. Admire the coconut palms. Taste the fresh pineapple the jailer brought us." "After Germany, a Cuban jail looks pretty good," my brother Richard said, stepping on the largest cockroach I had ever seen. "But it doesn't hold much of a future." Father started to hum, always a good sign. "If the big shots take bribes, then the little fish do too." Father offered our jailer the entire $50 we had been permitted to bring out of Germany. Within an hour, we sailed past the island in a motor launch into Havana, like a family on a picnic. Luckily, our relatives were able to send us money by cable. Father found a hotel that served 3 meals a day, and Richard and I stuffed ourselves with papayas and mangoes. Those last few months in Germany had forced us to lose our baby fat. My family thought it best to leave Cuba as quickly as we could. To learn American ways, I joined a camp for refugee boys run by American Quakers outside of Havana. There, in the lush green hills, this friendless, tormented rich boy learned to build houses, cut sugarcane, and harvest fruit. It was one of the most enriching experiences in my life. When our visas for America came, I looked forward to a new life. 2 years after Crystal Night, our relatives welcomed us as we stepped off the train in Richmond, Virginia. In 1943, just before my 18th birthday, I enlisted in the American Air Corps. I planned to pay Germany back with plane loads of bombs. One day, my commanding officer called me into his office. "You can't become a pilot. You're an enemy alien. We're sending you to the Army Medical School." "Medical school? Colonel, I don't plan to fight this war with a microscope." I refused to go. "How can a Jew boy refuse to go to medical school?" I insisted. "You'll be sorry. I'm transferring you to the 100th Infantry Division." So there I was, a foot soldier instead of a pilot, but not for long. After our forces invaded Europe in 1944, there was a great need for soldiers who could speak German fluently. I became part of the 100th Infantry Division intelligence staff. As Allied troops swept across France, I became an expert in sabotage and prisoner interrogation. On one of my first missions, I put on a German uniform and slipped across the border from France into Germany. We planned to release American prisoners of war who were being held in a nearby German camp. Marie, our guide, was a French resistance leader. She took us through a cave to a narrow valley. Below, German guards marched back and forth in front of the camp. Wearing the German uniform, I confidently approached the gate. "Heil Hitler! I was separated from my division. Can you give me food and transportation back to my unit?" As the sentries took me to the commanding officer, the men from my patrol slipped through the now unguarded gate. released the American prisoners, and took over the camp. I divided the prisoners into groups, telling each of my men to escort his group through German lines to safety. Since I was in German uniform, I headed back to our lines alone. The American soldier at our base looked beautiful, even with his machine gun pointed at me. "Manny Gale, Corporal, 100th Infantry," I said, forgetting that I was still wearing a German uniform. "Who won the World Series of 1943? The soldier demanded, his gun only inches from my chest. "This is 1945. "Don't try to fake it, Kraut. Give the right answer and you'll stay alive. Give the wrong answer and, well, I ain't got no time for taking prisoners." "Take me to your commanding officer. I'm in counterintelligence, 100th Infantry. The CO will verify my status." "What's the password for today?" "Aw, come on," I said. "I was out all night on a mission. Do you want me to sing Dixie before you take me to the CO?" "That might not be a bad idea." "Sing, Kraut, sing." I sang Dixie, off-key in my heavily accented English, loud and clear. I was lucky on that mission, but just a few days before the war ended, I was wounded by a German rocket. It took 13 operations in 13 months, but the doctors saved my arm. Manny Gale was awarded the Exceptional Civilian Service Award 3 times by the American government. He recently retired from government service and is now employed by private industry. He lives in Virginia with his wife and 3 children. Manny Gale's grandparents, who had chosen to stay in Germany, died in the gas chambers at Auschwitz concentration camp in 1943. This photo was on Manny Gale's passport when he left Germany.